Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Sharon Washington, and I'm coming to you from my home in beautiful Dutchess County. And I hope, first of all, everyone's home and safe and sheltering in place as we navigate this crazy time, right? We're all trying to figure out what the new normal is. And we're going to come out of this, but things are going to be different. I don't know if they're going to be any better or worse. They're just going to be different. But we're always here to create art, and that's what we do. So thanks to Primary Stages for putting this together. I am a proud Primary Stages family member. I've done 3 shows with them. The first one was String of Pearls by Michelle Lowe. The second was Billy Porter's While I Yet Live. And the third was my show, Feeding the Dragon. And I've actually been in all 3 of their spaces. So I've had a long relationship with Primary Stages, and I do feel like they are one of my artistic homes. It's a place where it really is about community and people making each other feel safe and supported, and they're really all about the artists. I mean, it's the art of playwriting is kind of their subheading, and it's where playwriting lives, and the encouragement is incredible, and so much has come out of there that's new and essential theater. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about my relationship with Primary Stages and be part of this virtual artistic world that we're stepping into. So I guess the first question is how I got my start in the theater. And that's always a hard question for me because I feel like I've always wanted to be part of the theater. Ever since I was a little girl, my mother used to take me to free concerts and readings, and I remember Madame Butterfly at the Y with my mother. So it's something I've always wanted to do. But I guess my official start, what I count as my official beginning of my theater career, was when I went to Yale Drama School. And that was many, 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 many years ago. I was there in what I like to think of, what I call the golden years. It was Dean Lloyd Richards. Earl Gister was our Dean of Acting. That's where my foundation is. And August Wilson was one of the many playwrights that came through at the time I was there. But he was the one that had the most impact. He was really pumping out most of his work during that time, the work of the cycle. So I actually saw Ma Rainey's on Broadway, and that's what, if I needed a clincher, watching those actors, watching Charles Rock Dutton and that performance, Teresa Merritt and the men in the band. I mean, it was just an incredible ensemble. So anyway, that's where I count sort of the beginning of my professional career was when I graduated from Yale, which was in 1988. Okay, you can look it up, so I might as well just come out and say it. I'm old. Before that, I had actually worked for Barry Grove, who's the managing director of Manhattan Theater Club, and he was at the time when I graduated. I went to undergrad at Dartmouth. I was not a theater major. I was an international government and African and African studies minor. And I had registered for the Foreign Service exam, and when I graduated, I thought I'd go to an African country, a French-speaking African country, because I also spoke French fairly well at the time, and that was kind of my idea of my career pursuits at that point. But I also did every show while I was at Dartmouth that I could possibly get into. I created my own. There was the Black Underground Theater and Arts Association. Anyway, so my college career was full of performing, but I wasn't going to do that as a, real job. I was the first person in my family to go to college, certainly the first person to go to an Ivy League school. So coming out and being an actor wasn't happening. But I couldn't get rid of the bug. So on graduation, I went back home to New York. I'm a born and bred New Yorker. I'm going to slide that in there. Born and raised, native New Yorker. When I got back to New York after graduation, I met with Barry Grove, who is an alum of Dartmouth. And I had a meeting with him, and he said, come into my office and we can chat. And at the end of the meeting, he said, look, I can't tell you anything about the acting business, but I have a job in the box office if you want it. So I was like, well, I needed a summer job. I was just getting out of college. So I took that job in the box office for the summer. I stayed, and then Barry's assistant quit. So I became his assistant. I was assistant to the managing director at Manhattan Theater Club for 2 years. So I learned a lot. That was invaluable experience to me. And I will say later on when we talk about sort of what my advice is to actors, artists, it's to know as much as you can about the business, because it is a business, and learn as much as you can, because we are our best advocates. We are our own best advocates. We certainly have people who work with us, we hope, managers, agents, producers, casting directors, but we've really got to know what's best for us. So I just think it's really important that as actors, as artists, we know as much as we can about the business we're in. That's our job, to know our business. And that means all aspects of it. So obviously you study your craft, but you also have to know the business of the business, which is a very different thing. When I was at Yale in a conservatory program, what we did all day was, learn the craft and practice the craft and rehearse and perform. And I'll never work that much again in my life. But what we didn't do, and what was lacking, which I think they've changed recently, and certainly ESPA at primary stages has a lot of working artists come in and talk about the business of the business, because we don't work in isolation. We should also know how to collaborate with our other fellow artists, designers, and stage managers. We should know how everything works. And so that's what I learned a lot working for Barry, was how a theater works, how an off-Broadway theater runs, what a budget is, what running at a deficit means, the importance of space, the importance of having your own space, the various programs, the educational programs, all of what goes into how a theater runs. Now, you don't have to go into, great in-depth analysis about it, but it's just really helpful to be as well-rounded an artist as you possibly can, so you know what you're talking about with a producer, or you know where your strength lies, you know when your request is a valid one, that you're not just talking about something you don't know anything about, that you're going in with knowledge, and taking care of yourself. So that's important. Anyway, that's a bit of a sidebar. But so I worked for Barry for a couple of years, and while I was at Manhattan Theater Club, I saw a lot of theater, and most of the people who were acting were from Yale, because Lynn Meadow, who was the artistic director, went to Yale. So she brought in a lot of her peeps. So I was like, this Yale School of Drama, what is that? Ignorance is bliss. And I applied there and got in. And again, that's where I say I begin my professional career when I graduate from Yale. And I went to Yale for a very specific reason. If I hadn't gotten in, and let me just say, conservatory is not for everyone. I think it's for people who have a very specific idea about what they want to do. If you want to do the classics, yes, you need to have some sort of training, because it does require breath and voice and support and all of the things you learn in a school atmosphere. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be 3-year conservatory, but you do need someone to teach you those techniques, and you do need to practice those techniques. There is an art to it, believe it or not. I had a very specific intention when I went to Yale, and it was because I wanted to have the best tools in my toolbox that I could possibly have. I really wanted to do Shakespeare and Shaw and the classics. And as I said before, you really need the technique, the support, the voice. I mean, just learning how to scan. I mean, it is a technical skill that you have to acquire. And for me, especially as a young African-American woman, I didn't want the reason that I didn't get the job to be that I wasn't trained. For me, I wanted to give them every opportunity to hire me. And like I said, I didn't want the reason for them to not hire me to be I didn't have the training. It was very important to me that I be as equipped as I possibly could in that room. So if you didn't hire me, it wasn't going to be because of that, if you know what I mean. So I think it's important when you're choosing your training or when you decide you're going to train, because it costs money and it's your time and it's your energy and it's hard. I think it's important that you go in knowing what you want to get out of this class. It's not just, oh, I want to take an acting class. It's what do you want to work on? What do you personally need to work on to help you grow as an artist? And that's really individual. And most of what I'm going to say today is about knowing yourself. To thy own self be true. I mean, you know, the poet said it. And I think it's really important. And, you know, it changes over the course of your career, what you need, what new skills you have to acquire, where you think you're getting a little rusty, or where you want to try something completely different. I decided I wanted to try to write a play. Yikes, right? But whatever you need to do to stretch yourself as an artist is important as well, because art doesn't come from a safe place, right? Art comes from the scary places. And once you feel comfortable, and that may take a while, and again, that's different for every individual, but if you're in a comfort zone, then you're not growing as an artist. So just something to think about. So my favorite show that I worked on, did I already say? So I graduated from Yale after 3 years, and I got my equity card while I was at school, while I was still in school. I did a production of, I did the original production of August Wilson's Piano Lesson. That was the show he was working on in my 3rd year. I was going into my 3rd year. So I had an opportunity to do it at Yale Rep and then at the Huntington. And then it went on to Broadway, and I didn't do it there. I was still a student. And then even after I got out, there were for various reasons, I didn't continue doing Grace, which is the role I originated. But anyway, that's a whole different story. I'm trying to think most recently, it's hard to say what my favorite show is. They're all so different. I think in the recent past, my favorite show is Wild with Happy by Coleman Domingo. That was one of those milestone shows. We had already done Scottsboro Boys together, and that was a milestone for me in that it was my first Broadway show. I just turned 50, and so there's always hope. And I done all this work off Broadway and some film and television, but I'd never been able to tick the Broadway box. And I got an opportunity to do Scottsboro Boys, which was extraordinary, creating that piece with Stroman and John Kander and Tommy Thompson. And anyway, I met Coleman Domingo on that show, and he started writing while we were at the Guthrie. Before we came into Broadway, while we were at the Guthrie, he started writing Wild with Happy. And he would say, come downstairs. We were in artist housing, and he would say, come downstairs and read this. And he had started with the Aunt Glo monologue. And I read that. And then he was writing some of the other characters. He was writing Adelaide, the mom character. And he said, come down here and read that. So I read that. And at one point, I think he was thinking of having it be two separate characters. But, you know, that's what you want to do. You want to get in somebody's head so they can't hear anything else. They can't hear any other voice besides yours. And I did that. And so I got to play both roles. Two completely different characters in the same show. And it was extraordinary. And because Coleman had written it for me, on me, he stretched me. He knew what I could do. I was finally given the opportunity to be funny. People sort of knew me as that dramatic actress who did a lot of crying and emoting, and was a lot of drama. So Coleman said, you know, you're one of the funniest people I know. People don't think you're funny. And so he wrote to correct that. So I will say that I think it's really important as artists that we have a support group. I had a group, we called it, we would get together and call them meetings. And it's not necessarily to create product, but it really is a safe space to vent, to exchange stories, to talk about what happened to you that day. And to also a place where you can speak your truth, your dreams, your fears, and to have people who love you and support you, who know you as an artist, who are able to say, that was great, or yeah, that was great, but yeah, you're falling back in some of those old habits again, or they push you, they challenge you. You should be able to challenge each other, because then you can be your best. You can all together push yourselves forward, and you see each other, you support each other's work, and you're like, wow, that's new, that's exciting. That's a wow. For me, it was watching Coleman. I'm fortunate enough to have Coleman Domingo as my brother from another mother, and he was creating. I thought, wow, it was the first time in my head I thought maybe I could write something, and he encouraged that. And Robert O'Hara, we all worked on Wild with Happy together, so that was a couple of the core people in our meetings, and we just pushed each other. It wasn't about again, it wasn't about working on any particular project. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Of course, it's great if you can find a writing partner or something, if that's what you want to do, to create together. But this was really about a place, like I said, where we could be honest and we could talk about where we were in the business and what craziness happened. And if somebody had a similar experience, or just to have somebody listen and say, you know, you're not crazy, or that's crazy, or to laugh about it, or you know what I'm saying. It's just really, really important to have that. You have your larger community, which is, I think of us as a community of artists and actors and designers and stage managers and playwrights, and the theatrical community. There's nothing like it. We really are there to support each other. But there are also those one or two people that you can really lean on. And at whatever stage in your career, you need friends like that. So my biggest turning point was, well, there were a few over the course. You know, I've been doing this 30 years. So there are a few turning points. I don't think there's that notion of the big turning point, you know, the overnight sensation, the big opportunity. I think a career is made up of a series of small turning points, small opportunities. And what you choose to do at each of those points will change the course of your career, change your trajectory, may or may not put you where you think you should be going. But it really is, and it sounds so cliche, but it's so true. It's about the journey. And this notion of the one big gig that's going to change your life, I don't know that that's necessarily true. It certainly hasn't been the case for most of the people I know who've been in the business for a number of years. Again, there are small turning points. So for me, a turning point was graduating from the drama school. Then it was getting my first bigger role doing Lady Anne and Shakespeare in the Park with Denzel. And then that was one turning point. So I started to get sort of recognized, and I started working at the public more. Then another turning point was booking my first guest star on a television series. I mean, that's another turning point. So again, I think a long career is made up of several turning points as opposed to one big one. I think I've already talked about how important I think community is. And I also want to say that it's not just about what you take from the community, but about what you give back to the community, what you give to the community. It really is a two-way street, and that means going to support others' work. That means, people ask, what do I do to brush up on my skills, or how do I stay connected? I go see things. I go see friends' work. I really want to make sure I'm there to support them just the way they've supported me. So I think that's just really important. We can become very self-absorbed. The nature of our business is that we're always looking internally. And I think it's important for us to look externally, to look at the bigger world. And I don't mean just performances. I mean, yes, go support your friends, go support new work, but also know what's going on in the world around you. Because as artists, it's our job to reflect that, right? So you have to know what's going on. Like, it can't all be about the next audition or the next gig. It's got to be about engaging in the larger world, engaging in society, whatever that means to you. Okay, so I asked the audience for some questions, and here are some that I think are pretty cool. Let's see. What was your process like for crafting a one-person show? My process. My process was I kind of made it up as I went along. I started out writing a book, or wanting to write a book, and I backed my way into writing a solo show. Full disclosure, I was never a big fan of the solo form, but in doing my research, when I decided that's what I was going to try to do, there are some extraordinary solo performances out there, and it changed my mind. And so I think just because of the nature of my story, and it was my story, that's how I ended up writing a solo piece. The other side of that is it was purely out of fear that I didn't want anybody else to have to read or perform this, being my first foray into playwriting. I thought, well, if it's a mess, I don't want to inflict that on another actor, some poor unsuspecting actor on my first time out. So the process was incredibly difficult. I mean, I talked to Coleman, of course, and I talked to Billy Porter, Charlene Woodard, people who done solo shows and who I respect enormously, and they all said, well, we really can't tell you. It's different for everyone. It's never the answer you want to hear. It's just your own path is your own path. And then afterwards, of course, they all told me that, well, we couldn't tell you how hard it was actually going to be. I mean, here you are standing up completely naked with no character to hide behind. It's your words, it's your story. It's crazy. So my process was to just try to do it. I started writing stories that I could remember, So I started writing chapters, and I didn't worry about, in the beginning, everybody kept telling me not to worry about how it all would eventually come together, because that would change over the course of creating the piece, but to just write, just let your mind go and write the story. So it was almost like transcribing, because I'd been living with these stories for so many years, so I could hear my father's voice and my mother's voice and the other characters. So I started writing from that point of view. I started with the characters' voices and individual stories, and then the job was figuring out the spine, how they all held together, and if there was one overarching objective storyline, what pulled you through, what was the thread between the stories. And that was really hard, finding out the why. Why do I want to stand up 8 times a week and tell people these stories, and would they care? I mean, that's huge. So the process was little by little, and it was, again, leaning on people who had done this before, having directors help, having outside voices help. I workshopped it at New York Theater Workshop at Dartmouth. Primary Stages was instrumental in giving me some space to write. Two River Theater. I mean, I had a lot of people. I went to my theater homes to try to get the support and get people to read it early on. So that was sort of the process in a nutshell. Finding the ending. I mean, there were so many hurdles, and that's it. That was the process. It was it was joyful, but it was really, really hard. I don't think I will ever do that again. How do you balance your work as an actor and a playwright? How do you go between wearing the hat of an actor and the hat of playwright in the rehearsal room? Well, that's, I don't know the answer to that, because it was really hard, and I don't know that I successfully did it. I tried, like literally I tried to like one day say, okay, I'm wearing the actor hat today, and today I'm only taking notes as an actor. And that worked sometimes. I would say, oh, well, that's a note for the playwright. And I would have my stage manager write that note down. But you try. That's all you can do, is try. And I think you have to go in with that goal eventually. I mean, I remember I was still working when I was in Pittsburgh, when we were at City Theater, still actively working on the script. We hadn't actually finished. And at one point, I stopped a rehearsal about, we were going into tech the following week, and I said, we have to stop. I mean, I have to learn these lines, like the actor has to learn these lines. Like whatever's on the page now is on the page, for better or worse. I have to learn these lines. So I think sometimes you have to make decisions like that in order to move forward. If you have a production or you have a deadline, you just have to stop. But again, it's not easy. So that's what I tried, wearing the actor hat and then having a stage manager take playwright's notes. And then maybe the next day I would come back in and I was like, I'm the playwright today. Let's try to fix some scenes. So I did try to break it up like that. What the hardest thing is when I was actually performing was, saying the playwright's words and not editing my own words as they were coming out of my mouth. Because again, you have to see what the show is as written on the page, not edit it as you're speaking it, because then you'll never know what you have. So what was it like to see your play about growing up in the library be actually in bookstores and libraries? It's extraordinary. This little girl who lived in the library went to the library to see my book on those shelves. So to see it with a call number and wedged in there between, what are the other W's, Wasserstein and Wilson, kind of extraordinary. I went actually to the Lincoln Center Library for the Performing Arts and actually took a picture because I was so excited. To see it in bookstores, to see it in print, it's extraordinary. I never thought actually that I would be on this side of it, especially during the process of writing it. I mean, you just never know. You don't know where it's going. You don't know. You just don't know. There are so many unknowns. But I was fortunate to have the 3 productions. So I started at City Theater, then I did it at Hartford Stage, and then I did it at Primary Stages. And so to have that was extraordinary. So I could change and refine and tweak between productions, which is where you learn an extraordinary amount, right? Because you have an audience. But anyway, I digress. Yes, it was thrilling to see it in bookstores and libraries. And I hope to see it in even more bookstores and libraries over the coming months and years. You're an actress across so many different platforms: film, TV, audio, theater. How do you have to change as an actor between mediums? What remains constant? It's a great question. What remains constant is you're always trying to tell the truth, right? And that you're always storytelling. You're always, no matter what the medium, you're always communicating, telling a story. So that never changes. It's the how of your telling, right? So, it's the basic classic response to the difference between theater, film, and television is size, right? So in theater, you have to be big so that they can hear you at the top of the delacorte, right? 2,000 seats or 99 seats, or, you adjust your instrument to fill that space. Film and television are smaller. Film actually, a close-up on film, I really do believe the camera can see what you're thinking. So you can't be large because then you look crazy. And you have to trust. That's what I had to learn the most, is you have to trust that you've done your work. You've prepared just as you would prepare to do a theater piece. You've prepared, you've done your homework, you know who the character is, no matter what the role, whether it's a series regular or a episodic guest star, whatever it is, you've done your homework, right? When you show up to set, you got as much information as you possibly can about the character. You've read the script if they've given you the script to read, when you haven't had to sign an NDA or whatever. But anyway, you've done your work when you arrive on set, and then you have to let that go. It's important to know what kind of content is out there. I'm primarily talking now about film and television. And because there is so much content and so much is being produced, I think it's really important that we as actors know the various formats, actors and writers. I'm looking at it now as well from a writing perspective. But, is it an episodic, and what does that mean? And is it a short form series? Is it a short film? Is it a narrative? There's so many terms and ways of making stories, because it basically is about telling stories, right? So whatever part that is, whether you're the character telling the story, whether you're the actor writing the story, it's about telling stories. And there are so many ways now to tell stories in short form and long form. So I think it's our job to know what that means, what that looks like. So I would say brushing up on your skills at home is watching. You can learn a lot by observing and by actively watching. And sometimes you have to watch things twice. Sometimes you have to watch as just the audience enjoying the story, and then maybe you can watch it again or watch something else with different eyes and not look at it as merely a audience member, but, oh, look at the camera direction. Oh, look, is that a close-up? Is that a 3/4 shot? Just make yourself familiar with what is going on screen. The same can be said for working in the theater. It's all about going and seeing things. And I think now, obviously, with the COVID pandemic, we can't go to theater as much, but we can. A lot of theater has been put online. A lot of shows have been put online. I think it's a great time to do some research and watch performances. And that's what I do, is I steal from the best. I mean, if there's a performance and somebody's doing something, I'm like, ooh, I wonder how I can work that into my little toolbox. So observation is really key. Other than that, we as actors, it's hard to brush up on your skills at home because you're at home talking to yourself. So you really need a partner, right? I said something earlier about us being very internal looking as artists and performers, and pushing that to be more external. I think that also helps in your technique, because what I use is the same technique I was taught at Yale all those years ago, is playing an action on someone else. That's how you want to make the other person feel, right? And that takes the attention off yourself. I think what's beneficial about that as a kind of philosophy is taking the attention off yourself, because then you don't become so in your head. And I think that works and is true for the way you look at life. It's like once you get in here and once you get inside your head, it's the voices and you get in this little loop. And if you think about playing an action, the basic action takes all of the pressure off yourself. You're looking externally to try to affect change on somebody else. And I think that's really key. I try to practice that as much as I possibly can. Sometimes I'm good at it and sometimes I'm not. But because we all can turn inwards. And that's not a bad thing. It's just not, we need to take time to do that sometimes, but I think looking out is a good way to move through the world. I think it's been really hard obviously it's been really hard for everyone, no matter what you do. This time period, there's so much uncertainty, and we've gone through weeks of uncertainty leading up to this point, and now it's like, what's the new normal? What does going forward look like? We're doing these talks online so that we can stay connected. We're trying our best to keep things moving forward, knowing that what's on the other side might not look like where we came from. So it's difficult. And I think as actors, as artists, we're so used to community and we're so used to communicating. I think actually right now it's a good time to take a breath, to take a pause, and really spend some time thinking about what you want to do next. That's what I'm trying to do. I've got a couple of ideas about a play that I want to work on, as well as a screenplay. I'm trying to turn Dragon into a screenplay or a teleplay. There's also a book I'm working on. So I have all these projects, and I thought, oh, now I have all this time, I can get to work. And that just hasn't been the case. It's been a struggle to sit down and focus. Like, focus is really hard because there's so many other things. There's all this information. There are the daily COVID updates. There's just keeping food in the pantry. There's daily life stuff that's important, that's vital. So you think, sheltering at home, I'll be able to get all this work done. But I think we have to be kind to ourselves. And if one more person posts that Shakespeare wrote King Lear during the plague, I'm going to punch him in the face, because that's great, but that's not necessarily what we're all capable of doing. We all cope in different ways, and we have to figure out what that way is for us. If you feel like you're going to write and write and write, and you're going to write your way out of this, that's fantastic. But again, everything we do is so individual. So what works for me may not work for you. So I'm trying to write, and I'm trying to get into the habit. I was fortunate enough to be asked to join a couple of residency programs this summer, where I thought, oh, finally I'll get the time to sit and I have a week or two off with nothing else to do but write, and now I can't go. They're being postponed or delayed or canceled entirely. So I'm still figuring out what I can do and what this new schedule is going to look like, because I do think eventually we're going to have to figure out, we will come out of this and there will be art and music and dancing and life, but what we do between now and then, you know, we're still figuring that out. So I have a few ideas. I don't know what the next one big idea is, but I have a few, so we'll see how that works out. I love being an actor because I love telling stories. And I think right now, more than anything else, we need those stories to stay connected. And I think what's exciting is that, yes, I'm used to telling a story on stage or on screen, but we still have some of our screens. And now more than ever, it's vital to stay connected via our stories. So that's what I find most exciting. And I'm so grateful that I have this outlet to do this right now, that I have a way of thinking, actually. Because we know as actors how to take the time to be alone and to work, and then to come out of that and to share. So I think a lot of what we know as actors and how we function and how we move through the world as actors will serve us well during this crisis. Because what comes as second nature to us is not necessarily true for someone who doesn't move through the world that way. So I think we're in a really fortunate position. It's not easy, but the creative brain finds a way. What books are you looking forward to reading? Ooh, that's a fun one. So this is my by my bed book stack basket. So you can see I joined a book club since I moved upstate. So some of these are book club books and some of these are part of what I'm looking forward to reading. So The Yellow House by Sarah Broom. Everything Inside, Stories by Edwidge Danticat. I still haven't read this. This has been by my bed for probably since it was published. Michelle Obama's book. White Fragility. A Little James Baldwin, The Evidence of Things Not Seen. You know, I haven't read a lot of this, any of this yet, but I want to go back and read. This is one of my favorites, Brown Girl Dreaming by Jackie Woodson. It's like inspiration to me. It was inspiration to me since starting to want to write myself. Old in Art School by Nell Painter, the story of starting back into school when you're, let's see, I can't remember. She probably says how old she is. She goes back to, in her 60s, she goes back to earn a BFA and MFA in painting. In her 60s, Nell Painter, inspiration. Well, and of course, My Life with Prince. You know, there's got to be something like that in there. The Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston. I heard about this, or I saw her do a piece about this on the NewsHour. My Sister, the Serial Killer. And Exit West. So it's a bit of, it's eclectic. I finished, Washington Black, which I finished that was my first one in the book club. So, and you know, I might as well show you the whole box. Notes from a Young Black Chef. So you think this could take me through most of the pandemic, I hope, if I can actually get it done. So that's, this is just the box under my bed. There are more. I'm trying to write a picture book. That's one of my projects. I want to do Feeding the Dragon as a picture book. So I have a stack of, classic as well as new and wonderful picture books to inspire me. So that's my reading, what books I'm looking forward to reading. And the last question is, let's see. As a native New Yorker, how does it feel living away from it all upstate? It feels great. I will always be a native New Yorker. It will always be home. That will never change. And, honestly, I'm twice a week at least before, this crisis. I was on the Metro North. I'm on the Metro North line, so I can be in the city in an hour and a half, which sounds like a long time because it's really 2 hours door to door. But I've learned how to use that time to study my lines or catch up on emails. It's amazing. It's like an hour and a half to myself with no distractions. So that's actually a good thing. So I love it. I mean, I lived in Manhattan Plaza for over 20 years. It's extraordinary. It's a wonderful community. I miss my neighbors, but I don't miss living in Hell's Kitchen. It was time for us to go. My husband and I were both ready. And to have the space, my husband works at home, he's a filmmaker, so to have the space to get out onto the porch and read or think or take a walk in the countryside, it's extraordinary. I never thought I'd leave the city, but we haven't looked back. And like I said, it's not like I don't go in often enough. I still see shows, I still see friends. Friends come up here, so I still have, my primary stages family. So I'm around. I'm just a little further north. And there's lots of art up here. I mean, there's all kinds of, there's Bard, there's Vassar, I'm still here. So that's it. Hope you guys are staying safe. And this was fun. I'll see you in the real world, not the virtual world, soon as we can. Ciao.